When I look at the world today, I see nations that spent centuries believing they had the power to define the rules. Nations that thought they could tell others what to do, how to live, what to trade, and what to follow. And yet today, there's one country that makes all of them uncomfortable, one country that challenges their dominance without firing a bullet, one country that has risen in silence and now stands so tall that the world doesn't know whether to admire it or fear it. That country is India, and let me tell you, India today is not just rising. It has become the world's biggest fear. Why? Because it is the only nation that has mixed ancient wisdom with modern ambition, that has combined tradition with technology, that has chosen to rise not by asking for permission, but by rewriting the script of global power itself. For decades, the world underestimated India. They saw poverty, they saw chaos, they saw noise, they saw division, they saw a country where people argued, debated, and fought over ideas, but what they missed was the strength inside that chaos. What they didn't see was the resilience built in the people who could live with 1,000 problems, yet find 1,000 solutions. What they ignored was the spirit of a civilization that has survived invasions, colonization, exploitation, and still stood on its feet. And now, when India has decided to rise, when India has decided to put its foot down, the world doesn't know how to stop it. That's why India is feared, because you can compete with a nation that follows your rules, but you cannot compete with a nation that creates its own. Look at the economy. The same countries that once loaned India money, the same countries that looked at India as a market for cheap labor, are now begging to invest there. India has built the fastest growing economy in the world, not because somebody handed it over, but because people worked with their blood and sweat. The farmer in the village, the coder in Bengaluru, the entrepreneur in Mumbai, the scientist in ISRO, the soldier at the border, all of them together created this momentum. When you combine over 1 billion people with dreams and the discipline to chase them, you don't just get growth, you get power. And the world fears that power because economic power is not just about money. It's about influence. It's about negotiation. It's about the ability to say no when others want you to say yes. And today, India is saying no to being used, no to being bullied, no to being dictated to. That's fear for those who are used to controlling. Now let's talk about technology. Who would have thought that a country once mocked for its broken roads and slow systems would build one of the most advanced digital infrastructures on Earth? Today, India is leading in digital payments, in fintech, in startups, in artificial intelligence, in space exploration. This is the same country that sent a mission to Mars cheaper than what Hollywood spends on making a movie. This is the same country that lands near the south pole of the moon when the world thought it was impossible. This is the same country that provides satellites for Africa, for Southeast Asia, and still develops its own military technology at home. You know why this scares the world? Because technology was the West's monopoly. It was their ticket to control. They sold it to others and made money from dependence. But now, India is breaking that dependence. And when you break dependence, you break control. That is why India is feared. But technology alone does not explain the fear, because at the heart of India's rise is something deeper, its civilizational confidence. India is not just another developing country trying to copy someone else's model. India is building its own. It is going back to its roots. It is saying, we don't need to become another America. We don't need to become another China. We will become India. And when a nation finds that clarity, it becomes unstoppable. The West fears India because it cannot be culturally colonized anymore. Hollywood cannot shape Indian minds. Western media cannot shame Indian society into submission. Their think tanks cannot dictate India's policies. Instead, India is exporting yoga, Ayurveda, meditation, spirituality, philosophy. It is exporting not just goods but values, and values are stronger than weapons. Values shape generations. When the West sees millions of people around the world turning to Indian traditions for strength and healing, it scares them. Because power is not just about how many jets you have, it's about how many hearts you influence. Let's not ignore defense. The Indian military today is not just defending borders. It is redefining how the world looks at deterrence. Nuclear weapons, ballistic missiles, hypersonics, aircraft carriers, space-based defense. India has all of it. And the most dangerous thing about India's military power is not the weapons, it's the restraint. India has the capability to destroy enemies, but it chooses diplomacy. India has the strength to humiliate rivals, but it chooses silence. The world fears this silence, because silence backed by strength is scarier than loud threats with no substance. When India keeps calm after provocations, it is not weakness. It is warning. It is a reminder that when the time comes, India can unleash fire in ways its enemies cannot imagine. That fear is real. That fear is justified. Now, think about diplomacy. There was a time when India was seen as a follower in international politics. Today, it is the deal maker. America courts India. Russia courts India. Europe courts India. The Middle East courts India. Africa courts India. Even countries that were once hostile now line up for trade, for defense, for partnerships. India is the bridge no one can avoid. And when you become that bridge, you control the flow of power. The West fears losing its monopoly. China fears losing its dominance. And smaller nations fear being irrelevant. All of that because India stands tall without bending. But the greatest fear is not about money, weapons, or even diplomacy. The greatest fear is about the mindset of the Indian people. For the first time in centuries, Indians are believing again. For the first time, the youth is not saying, "Can we do it?" They are saying, "We will do it." For the first time, Indians abroad are not apologizing for where they come from. They are leading global companies, universities, and governments with pride. For the first time, the ordinary Indian looks at the mirror and sees not a victim of history, but the driver of the future. That confidence is contagious. That confidence is dangerous for the old order, because the moment people believe in themselves, they no longer accept chains, and India today is a nation that has broken chains. Now, let me tell you why this fear will keep growing. Because India is not just growing in one direction. It's growing everywhere. It's growing in economy, in technology, in military, in culture, in diplomacy. That is multi-dimensional growth. Most nations can handle one competitor at a time, but when one country rises on all fronts, it becomes unstoppable. The West can compete with China's manufacturing. They can compete with Russia's military. They can compete with Europe's diplomacy, but how do you compete with a nation that brings all of it together while standing on 5,000 years of civilizational foundation? That's why India is feared, because it is not just a country, it is a civilization reawakening. And no one in history has ever stopped a civilization that wakes up, and this fear will manifest in many ways. You will see more negative stories in media about India. You will see more pressure from global organizations. You will see more alliances formed against India. You will see more attempts to divide its society, to create internal conflicts, to weaken its unity, because fear does not stay silent. It fights back. The world will fight India's rise, but here's the truth, it won't work, because India has already crossed the threshold. Once a nation crosses from doubt to belief, from survival to dominance, from dependence to independence, nothing can push it back. So why has India become the world's biggest fear? Because it has something no other rising nation had before. It has the numbers, it has the knowledge, it has the nuclear weapons, it has the networks, it has the narrative. It has the past, it has the present, and it has the future. The West knows it. China knows it. The world knows it, and every time they sit in their meetings behind their closed doors, they whisper the same question: how do we stop India? And the answer is simple: they can't. That is why the world fears India. Not because India wants to conquer them, not because India wants to dominate them, not because India wants to colonize them. The fear comes from something much bigger. The fear comes from the realization that the old order is dying, and India is the proof. The fear comes from the fact that the balance of power is shifting, and India is the anchor. The fear comes from the truth that for the first time in modern history, a nation that was once enslaved is now becoming the leader, and the world doesn't know how to deal with it. India today doesn't need validation. It doesn't need permission. It doesn't need approval. It knows who it is, and it knows where it's going. That's why India is feared, because you cannot defeat a nation that has made peace with its identity and has chosen to rise with both wisdom and power. You can only watch, you can only adjust, you can only accept, and that acceptance is what scares the world the most. It marked the birth of India's assertive military doctrine backed by innovation. But behind this force lies something deeper, something the world cannot replicate, and that is India's civilizational philosophy, offering an alternative to Western ideology. For centuries, the West dictated the global mindset. They told the world what democracy meant, what development meant, what progress meant, and for a long time most nations accepted that narrative because they had no other model to follow. The West packaged its ideology as the only path forward and sold it through colonization, propaganda, economic dependence, and cultural dominance. But the flaw in their model has always been that it doesn't fit every civilization. It doesn't fit every culture. It doesn't fit every history. When you impose one ideology on many, eventually resistance is born. And today, the strongest resistance to that monopoly comes not from confrontation, but from example. And that example is India. India is showing the world that you can rise, you can prosper, you can lead without becoming a clone of the West. India is showing that democracy does not have to look like Washington, Paris, or London to succeed. It can have its own flavor, its own traditions, its own complexities. India is showing that development is not about blindly consuming or imitating, but about adapting technology to serve the masses, not just the elites. India is showing that culture is not a burden to modernity, but a foundation for resilience. When 1 billion people pray in different languages yet stand under one flag, that is proof that harmony can coexist with diversity. That is proof that unity does not mean uniformity, and the West fears this because it challenges the very story they have told the world for generations, that without their model, chaos is inevitable. India proves that their story is not only outdated, it is false. When Western ideology spread, it carried with it a philosophy of individualism, consumption, and power dominance. It turned everything into competition. Who is richer? Who is stronger? Who is more influential? India comes with a civilizational philosophy rooted in dharma, in balance, in collective responsibility, in the idea that strength is not just measured by what you take, but by what you give. The West says success is when you outdo your neighbor. India says success is when your neighbor rises with you. The West says peace comes through power projection. India says peace comes when power is controlled by self-discipline. The West builds empires to control. India builds relationships to connect. This is why India's rise is feared, because it brings not only a new power, but also a new philosophy, and philosophies are harder to fight than armies. Think about it. Western ideology dominated the last 300 years because it controlled trade, money, and guns. But behind that power was a world, you that convinced nations to follow. If people stop believing in that world, you, the weapons and the dollars lose their magic. That is what is happening today in Africa, in Asia, in Latin America. Leaders are no longer quoting Western thinkers to shape their future. They are looking toward India, toward its balance of modernity and tradition, toward its example of how to lift millions from poverty while keeping identity intact. They are observing how India develops digital systems for its poorest citizens while protecting spiritual traditions for its oldest temples. They are noticing how India can expand military capability while still speaking about non-violence as a principle. This duality confuses the West because their philosophy has always been one-dimensional. Power equals dominance. India is proving that power can equal dignity. India's civilizational philosophy is not new. It is thousands of years old. But what makes it dangerous to Western ideology is that it is being reborn at the exact time when the Western model is collapsing. The West is divided within itself, questioning its own values, struggling with its own societies. Their democracy is becoming fragile, their economies are shaking, their people are losing faith in their institutions, and at that moment, India comes forward with a philosophy that is stable, confident, rooted, and practical. The world sees this contrast, and fear is born in the minds of those who built their supremacy on the belief that there is no alternative, because now there is. India's way of thinking has always been about balance between material growth and spiritual grounding. It does not demonize wealth, but it does not worship it either. It does not deny technology, but it does not make humans slaves to it. It does not reject globalization, but it does not allow globalization to erase its roots. In a world suffocated by extremes, this balance is refreshing, but also threatening to those who thrive on extremes. When India tells the world that progress does not have to mean losing your culture, that you can adopt the internet without abandoning your traditions, that you can fly jets without forgetting your prayers, it shakes the psychological foundation of Western ideology. Because Western ideology thrives on convincing others that modernity demands surrender, India refuses to surrender, and this refusal is the ultimate power. Even in foreign policy, you can see this philosophy at play. The West pressures nations to pick sides. You are either with us or against us. India rejects that binary. India trades with the United States and Russia, cooperates with Israel and Iran, builds relations with Saudi Arabia, and at the same time strengthens ties with Shia powers. It talks to China while standing firm on borders. It does business with Africa without enslaving it, with Latin America without exploiting it. This philosophy of non-alignment rooted in civilizational depth terrifies the West because it proves you can be independent. You can engage with all without being dominated by one. The West cannot accept this because it breaks the very strategy through which they controlled the world. At the heart of this civilizational philosophy is something the West struggles to grasp: time. The West thinks in decades, in election cycles, in short-term profits. India thinks in centuries. India does not measure its success by the next quarter, but by the next generation. It does not panic if the GDP slows for a year. It knows the trajectory of centuries is what matters. This long view comes from a civilization that has already seen empires rise and fall. While the West fears decline, India embraces continuity. That is why India does not imitate blindly, because it has patience. And patience in geopolitics is more powerful than any weapon. A nation that can wait, adapt, and endure always wins against nations that panic and collapse under their own expectations. Western ideology also fears India because it cannot control the Indian mind anymore. In the past, colonial powers used education systems, media, and propaganda to shape how Indians thought about themselves. They made Indians feel ashamed of their traditions, their religions, their philosophies. But today, that shame has transformed into pride. The youth of India are as comfortable building AI startups as they are practicing yoga. They are as confident coding for the world as they are chanting mantras passed down for thousands of years. This fusion of modern skill and ancient identity is unbreakable. And when identity is unbreakable, external ideology loses its grip. That is why India's civilizational philosophy is the biggest threat. It immunizes 1 billion people against foreign domination of the mind, and this immunity is spreading. When people in Europe practice yoga, when executives in America meditate, when scientists in Japan look to Ayurveda, when thinkers in Africa read Indian philosophy, they are unconsciously shifting away from Western ideology. They are questioning the narrative that only Western values hold answers. This is slow but powerful, and the West knows that once ideas shift, power follows. Because the greatest empires fall not when their armies lose, but when their ideas lose believers. This is why India's rise is unique. It is not just a rise of economics, of military, of politics. It is a rise of ideas. It is a reminder that civilizations cannot be erased, only suppressed for a while. And once they reawaken, they offer the world something more powerful than weapons, an alternative way of living, of governing, of balancing life, an alternative that threatens not by force but by attraction. And attraction is more powerful than coercion because people choose it willingly. That is why the fear of India is deeper than the fear of any other rising nation. It is not just fear of competition. It is fear of replacement. Fear that the Western story is no longer the only story. Fear that the monopoly is broken. Fear that the center of gravity is moving east, carried not just by India's economy or military, but by its civilizational philosophy that offers humanity something it has been searching for: balance, dignity, and freedom from domination.